Health Monday, we welcome Jared and Jacob from Marble City Pharmacy on this Health Monday, the 10th day of January 2022. And gentlemen, Happy New Year to you.
You too.
National Championship Monday, our two least favorite teams.
I'm surprised y'all are not there.
We're going to go that route for Auburn. Yeah.
Hey, listen, we're talking about something that is, I've seen a lot, and you guys have too, and it's affected a lot of people. It's Parkinson's disease, and what a horrible disease that is. And kind of walk us through, what is Parkinson's?
Well, first of all, we're talking about this because this is something that, first, you guys all need to know about, but it's near and dear to our heart. Our grandfather had Parkinson's disease. A number of our great uncles had Parkinson's disease, and so this is kind of something that's affected our family.
So it's hereditary, right?
It definitely can be,
Yeah.
particularly when a lot of people in your family have it. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But basically, Parkinson's is a nervous system disorder. It gets worse over time, and it affects the neurons or nerve cells in your brain that make dopamine. So if you can remember the word dopamine, you're halfway to understanding of Parkinson's, even though things are complicated. So it decreases the amount of dopamine that's in your brain, and dopamine affects the way that you think, it affects the way that you move, and so as we get into this, you'll see some more of that.
What is dopamine? What does that mean?
All right, here comes the extra education.
It's a neurotransmitter.
Yeah, we're going to use the term neurotransmitter. Call it brain chemicals. Okay, let's go with that. Brain chemicals. There are several of them that are common. The two that we talk about the most in pharmacy would be dopamine and serotonin. They may have heard that term, but those are neurotransmitters or brain chemicals that are constantly passing back and forth between nerve cells, neurons in your brain, sending signals that tell your brain what to do with the rest of your body. Controls all sorts of things, movements, thoughts, moods, everything. And so this particular neurochemical that we deal with in Parkinson's disease, dopamine, controls tons of things throughout the body, and that's where all the symptoms of the disease that we'll talk about come from.
Let's talk more in depth about the causes of Parkinson's disease.
Well, you're not going to get much on causes because the causes are really unknown. There are some things that you see Parkinson's happening more in. For example, people who are over 60 years old. It happens 1.5 times more in men than it does in women. And then you got, like I said a minute ago, you have people who have a number of Parkinson's cases in their family. So if you're out there and you have one relative that has Parkinson's disease, then your chances of getting Parkinson's are not all that great. If you're like us, you got lots of relatives with Parkinson's, then honestly, our chances are a whole lot better.
Wow. Jacob, talk about some of the symptoms of Parkinson's.
All right, so the symptoms, the number one symptom that happens for most people, I guess let me back up and say no two people have the same Parkinson's disease. So, symptom A here, this guy doesn't have it, this one does. Symptom B, this one doesn't. So just know that going in, no two Parkinson's are the same. But the more common ones, the one everybody associates with thinking, Muhammad Ali, whenever you see him on TV, the tremor.
Yeah.
And it usually starts with something very small in the hands. Call it a pill rolling motion. Imagine if you had something very small and round, about the size of a pill in your hand, and you were rolling in between your thumb and forefinger. It usually starts with something like that. Very small hand movements that you're not doing on purpose. And then gets to that bigger tremor that everybody pictures. What was the '96 Olympics when he was lighting the Olympic torch, and you see him barely. Yeah. That's the Parkinson's tremor. But beyond that, slowed movements. Walking becomes difficult, and even in the earlier parts of the disease, when you can still walk on your own, it's just a lot slower. The movements of every kind become slower. Rigid and stiff muscles, which add to that slower movement, make it harder to move. And then one that people see and notice a lot early is decreased or masked facial expressions. Hey, you don't look happy, you don't look sad. I told a joke, you didn't smile. I said something terrible, you didn't frown. You just
kind of fixed.
Blank, very blank facial expression. Not that not feeling those emotions, it doesn't show here, which is rare in humans. We notice that immediately in somebody. Hey, there's nothing expressive going on here, and that's one of the early ones that shows up for most people. But also it affects balance and posture and other movements and speech and writing and so on and so forth. Writing usually becomes smaller and more messy, which some of ours can't get much worse.
I've been doing that for years.
Yeah.
Jared, there are later complications too with Parkinson's disease.
Well, first of all those things that Jacob named are progressive, like you said earlier. So those things all get worse as time goes on. But then you have, I don't know how to call this, let's just say thinking difficulties. So as time goes on, you can't perform simple tasks like you used to. You have issues with depression. And, as you might imagine, if you're in a situation where you're having trouble performing activities of daily living, you're having a situation where you're having trouble walking, or your gait is, slow and measured, you can't do the things you used to do, of course depression comes along with those things. One of the things that we saw in our granddad that you see in later complications is a swallowing problem. People just have trouble getting things down, and so a lot of times people end up on a feeding tube, at some point. And then sleep problems. I told Jacob, I'm looking at this list and I'm thinking, man, I got a number of these things. I can't sleep a lick right now, but sleep problems. So those would be the main things. So the things that Jacob named progressing, and then these other things coming on later, it becomes obviously a big deal.
Yeah. I've got friends who struggle with Parkinson today, and they try to physically stop shaking. They can't. And so how do we know, Jacob, whether or not we have Parkinson's?
Well, you can't decide on your own, because there's a lot of conditions that make people shake or have a tremor. There's a lot of conditions that obviously make people lose their balance or walk slower. There's a lot of, crossing up of lists of symptoms of a lot of these diseases, right? And so, we can't decide ourselves, this must be Parkinson's. It does take a doctor, and honestly, it takes a specialist of a doctor, a neurologist, who goes through a litany of questions and physical exams and tests to determine whether or not he or she thinks you have Parkinson's disease. Because there's not a blood test that says, well, I can't tell if it's Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or this or that or the other. There's not one. And so the doctor has to make his or her best guess going through a litany of tests and questions and this, that, and the other. And sometimes they even guess wrong on those. They'll say, well, I think this is Parkinson's. So we'll get to treatments in a minute. We're going to treat it like Parkinson's. If you get no better at all, it's not Parkinson's. If you do, I was right, because the treatments are very specific. In a lot of ways, it's diagnosed by the neurological specialist based on his or her best assessment of what you can tell them and what they observe, and then confirmed by whether or not the treatment works.
Yeah. Speak of some of the treatments that are available today.
Well, we said dopamine in the beginning. The treatments, as far as drugs go, they're all about dopamine. So there are medications on prescription that increase the amount of dopamine in your brain. There are medications that basically try to mimic dopamine to get the effect from dopamine in your brain. There are medications that keep your brain from breaking down dopamine to try to keep those dopamine levels high. And then there are medications that assist all of those medications in doing the job that they're trying to do. So you don't have to remember any of that. You just need to remember it's all about dopamine. And so that's from a drug standpoint, that's what we're looking at. There are some other types of treatments. There are even types of surgeries that are performed later on, but honestly, those are used a whole lot less rarely.
Nice.
Less commonly. They're very rare is what I was trying to say, and we're certainly not experts on that sort of treatment. But the mainstay of therapy are these types of drugs that increase dopamine. Now, with that said, over time, they lose their effectiveness, right? Because this is a disease that you can't beat. There's no cure. So it's going to be progressive. There's going to be a time where the disease outlasts the treatments. But early on especially, these medications make a huge difference.
Are there arenas that people may go to find out more about Parkinson's?
There are, and those are important to us, obviously, because you kind of want to know. For those that use electronic, web-based sources, Parkinson's.org is the main page you're going to shoot at. They will help you understand the genetics of it. They can even point you to a genetic testing to know if you happen to be in one of these family clusters, although generally you know that without getting tested. Uncle this, aunt this, and grandma this had it, or didn't. but lots of information provided there, lots of, can point you to specialists in your area, kind of things like that to help you know. There are, for those that have it, or help someone that has it, there are support groups, even in this area. Jared and I have both spoken to a local Parkinson'S Caregiver Support group. So there's people out there, because it's common enough, there's people out there that, physicians that can help, support groups that can help, great information out on this Parkinson's.org that can help and point people just into an area of knowledge, whether or not you have it, whether it's what to do once you have it, or how to cope. There's a lot of help out there.
Yeah. Before we go, Jared, this morning, as I mentioned several times, I have friends that I know of two that have Parkinson's disease, and they become depressed. I heard you mention that a little bit earlier, and they become embarrassed, of not being able to control their movements and stuff like that. How can family be a support for that individual?
Well, family is everything, honestly. You get to the stage where a family becomes a caregiver, right? You have to have assistance from somebody. First thing it's going to be is your spouse if you're married, right? This is the kind of thing that takes a toll on a spouse. This is the kind of thing that takes a toll on the kids when the kids are willing to help. And now, if you're out there and you're a kid, you should be willing to help. But this is the kind of thing that takes a toll on a family, and over time it just gets worse. Honestly, you got depression in caregivers as well. But back to your question, just consider that for yourself. You get to a place where you can't do the things you used to be able to do. That has to lead to depression, right? Sometimes anger, lashing out, all those things, and then that in turn takes its toll on the primary caregivers, which are usually the family. So there are medications out there to treat depression, right? That can supplement these medicines that increase dopamine. And then you talk about treatment of depression for the caregivers as well.
Wow. Thank you both for being with us this morning. Very informative session of Parkinson's disease with, of course, Jacob and Jared from Marble City Pharmacy with us every month here on Daybreak Live. Thank you both for coming today.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.